It's my spin-off of the EBING Rig, except for we're going to capitalize on the bites that do happen on the jig, and we're also going to get that bonus finesse presentation at the same time. I'd rather have a 2-fish problem rather than a no-fish problem, all right? What's up, guys? Today we're going over what I think is wrong with the EBING Rig. I think there's 2 huge problems that people aren't thinking about or maybe overlook. They can actually turn into a solution instead of a problem. So I'm gonna go ahead and kick it off with problem number 1. So we've got our line here. Basically, if you've never heard of an EBING rig, it's your line to a metal bar with a jig. It's my illustration of a jig, not that good. But anyways, let's just say a red jig. That's been the hot color lately. It's got no hook on it, okay? And then it's got this bar. And then you've got your leader, anywhere 2 to 6 foot of leader off of that, with a circle hook, J hook, or you're choosing, and a small plastic bait. Now, the whole train of thought behind the EBING rig is your jig is going to act like a flasher, like an attractant, and then this little microplastic, or you could even put like a sardine on it, is going to be a more finesse presentation, and that jig is catching their attention, and then they're turning their attention to that small little bait. Maybe they're not super aggressive and eating jigs. I think this tactic would actually be really good for like a daytime bite when they're kind of turned off on those jigs, and you got to downsize those jigs during the day. So problem number 1 that I see is there's no hook on this jig. Why would I turn down a fish that's going to eat a jig? What if you get bit on that jig and there's no hook on it? It's like I don't know why you would drop that thing down without a hook. Even if it's got this metal bar on it, I would still throw a hook on it. Even if it's a circle hook, a treble hook, it does not matter. Some kind of hook needs to be on that jig. If you're going to run this bar and drop that jig down, it is not going to hurt you to drop a hook on there unless your stuff's getting tangled up. And that brings me to problem number 2, which is your weight is going to be dragging that whole rig down, okay? So say you hook a sardine. You've got to hook that sardine in line up through the nose or across the nose, so that way it tracks down in the correct direction. Or your plastic. If for whatever reason your plastic or sardine wants to spin on the way down, that line is going to come taut right up here, and this other line is going to come taut, and they're both going to be falling down parallel. If for whatever reason the current, the flutter of the jig, that is something to take into account too, is what is that jig going to do on its way to the bottom? So you're going to want a jig that's not going to have any action. It's just going to be a dart straight to the bottom. If it's not darting straight to the bottom and it's kind of doing a fluttering or any kind of motion, it's most likely going to twist your line up on the way down. And then your line, your braid or whatever, you're running like some heavy fluoro or mono on this end, is going to get twisted up with your leader and your microplastic or your sardine on the way down, and you're going to have a jumbled mess. I don't know how much bottom fishing experience you guys have, but if you've done any, you know that if you put the weight in front of your bait, like a Carolina rig or something like that, and you're dropping it down, there's a high probability some point during the day your stuff is going to get tangled up. May not be on every drop, or it might depend on how you're actually hooking that bait, that sardine, that microplastic, whatever. I do not like to rig my stuff like this. So I'm going to show you guys what I'm going to be doing instead. I'm still going to utilize this concept of fishing a microplastic. It definitely opened my eyes of some different possibilities, ideas that I'm going to be running and testing this season, and then putting that out to you guys as I kind of figure things out, work the kinks out, and start developing our bluefin rig. Slightly different than the EBING. All right, guys. So we're going to go ahead and dive into the rig that I'm going to make. That's going to be a spin-off of the EBING rig, but I think is better. More in line, less tangles, more hooks, and hopefully we can put some more fish in the boat that will bite the jig at the same time, presenting that finesse little lure or little sardine, whatever you want to use. I think it'll work on live bait and artificials. It's just completely going to be up to you what you want to fish. I think if you're speed jigging, fishing at night, I'm probably going to opt for a plastic, versus during the day I'm definitely going to be fishing a live sardine. Personally, that's what I've had better luck with, is like I'll typically drop my jig all night, and as soon as that sun comes up, I'm switching over to a flat fall with a little sardine, kind of like this rig I'll show you guys right now. All right, guys, so here we go. So I'm gonna start out with the swivel. On one end, I'm gonna tie my 80-pound fluorocarbon with a 1/0 circle hook. And on the other end, I'm gonna crimp my 130-pound, 180-pound fluoro to the jig. So this way, it's my spin-off of the EBING rig, except for we're gonna capitalize on the bites that do happen on the jig, and we're also gonna get that bonus finesse presentation at the same time. I'd rather have a 2-fish problem rather than a no fish problem. All right. So if we catch 2 fish on this rig this year, I'm gonna hopefully get it on GoPro for you guys and let you know. But anyways, so we'll go ahead and start out with the top end of the swivel. This is where I'm gonna run my 80-pound fluorocarbon. I use a San Diego jam knot. If you guys are wondering, there's a ton of videos about the San Diego jam knot. I highly recommend it. Super strong knot. It will not pull on you at all. I mean, it won't break on you or pull out. So I've got my 2/0 or 1/0 circle hook. I use Owner Super Mudos. And I'm going to want this leader a third to half as long as my jig leader, which is 130 or 150, 180 pound, whatever you guys like. This one personally is 180 because that's what I use for my grouper rigs. So I just run 180 fluorocarbon on all of my like heavy duty stuff. So I'm going to use about 6 foot of this 180 fluoro, and this is going to go to my jig. So just to recap, I've got 180 pound, 6 foot of leader. If you guys are watching YouTube, I'm having a mess right now. Anyways, 6 foot, 180 pound fluoro, and then we've got about 3 feet of our 80 pound fluoro with a finesse presentation. So I'm going to tie my line onto that 80 pound fluoro side of the swivel. You can do a 3-way swivel. I'm just going to use these big heavy duty swivels just because I don't care much for the 3-way swivels. So on this one end of our lighter presentation, I did some shopping, looked for the most realistic minnows. I saw an article or a video by, I think it was Captain Concepts on Instagram, and they were talking about them using like a small shrimp. I think it was made by Owner, and I did some research. I couldn't find any Owner shrimp. It was clear, teeny tiny, 3-4 inches, something like that. I went on Tackle Warehouse because bass fishing guys are usually into the most realistic stuff, especially the company Live Target. I've never fished them before, but I found these guys, and I just got like a typical little sardine pattern. I got a 5-inch and a 4-inch. Super cool looking. I'm gonna test them out on this upcoming fishing trip. I got a smaller size 2 twitch tail minnows, 4-inch, and then Mega Bass makes some clear ones. Clear does well no matter where you go, lakes, oceans, anything like that. Like a pearl to a clear works really well. So I've got those guys. That's what I'm gonna fish, and how I'm gonna rig it is I'm gonna throw this little teeny tiny sardine on my circle hook. You don't want to go too big on the circle hook because if you look at the presentation, like right now, even that 2/0 circle hook is pretty big on that guy. So I'd actually downsize that one. This one I'm gonna fish these 5-inch live targets, but these are some Lunker City ones. I'm not a real big fan of them. I'm sure they would work, but I'm probably gonna downsize the hook if I fish something really small. So I recommend making a couple rigs, a couple with some smaller hooks, a couple with some bigger hooks. What I mean by smaller, I'd probably go with like a number 2, number 1 circle hook, and then make a couple rigs with like some 1/0 and 2/0. How I keep my gear organized, guys, is I keep plastic bags. Give me 1 second. And I label my stuff. So I have like little plastic sandwich bags, and I'll put like 2 rigs to a bag. So I got bluefin leader with 80-pound gold 1/0 hook right there. And so that way when I go in my box, I'm not crimping, tying knots all day fishing. I'm actually using my time to fish, especially when those fish are biting. You want to be able to capitalize on those bites and get your lines in the water as fast as possible, whether you break off, tangle up, catch a fish, swap a rig, whatever. Maximize your time at the rail and you'll catch more fish. You know, it's obvious, but the more preparation you do ahead of time, the better off you're going to be fishing. So back to the rig. So we've got our swivel, 3-foot leader, our little finesse rig or live sardine. And then on this end, 6 foot down, we've got our jig. And I just crimp a solid ring on there, guys, because with that solid ring, I'll put split rings on top of all my jigs. And then if I want to swap my jig or whatever, I can just take that split ring pliers and boom, 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 swap my jig. You know, if I want a heavier one, if the current's really bad, or switch it to maybe like a lighter one, something like that, depending if I want to go to a flat fall. And what I was talking about earlier is you're going to want a jig that doesn't have a whole lot of action to it, okay? Some of these jigs are designed to have some action to them, like this rip roller. That thing is designed to flutter and go all over the place and kind of get that bite on the fall. Just like a flat fall jig, its main attraction is on the way down, okay? There's a couple jigs, as you can see, this one's got kind of a fin on one side and it's circular on the other. I'm probably not going to fish that one on this rig either. Or, I mean, you could fish it because everything is in line. And what I mean by in line is, let's go ahead and throw a jig on there. Say you do want to fish a rip roller or a flat fall even. Something with a ton of action is you can throw it on there, and because everything is in line, you can drop it and not worry about your tangles. If you're fishing that ebbing rig, you're not going to be able to drop that thing down with a jig that's got a ton of action to it, because you're going to get tangled up on the way down. And that's going to ruin your whole concept of that rig, because you're going to be all tangled up. So with this, got my jig. I'm going to try a circle hook this year and a treble hook. I know some of you guys are probably going to laugh at me for that. I've caught a lot of fish with the traditional hooks with Kevlar. I usually tie my own. Use like a live bait hook and then some 400-pound Kevlar. I personally don't like J hooks. That's just like, if you listen to some of my other videos, I think you lose a lot of fish because of the J hook. I've tried it for live bait, jigs, everything, and it's like a lot of the time this fish just like come unbuttoned for whatever reason. And especially if you're kind of new to fishing, I would definitely recommend throwing a circle hook on there, because those fish, what they're going to do is they're going to bite this jig and they're going to shake their head. They're going to go crazy. And if you've got like, you know, a 10 to 16 ounce jig or even a 4 ounce jig, those fish are shaking their head down there. If you've got braid, A, you got to get that slack out of your braid if you're fishing dropping down 200 to 400 feet of water. And B, if you have braid and fluorocarbon, there is like zero stretch in that. So there's no, if you were running mono, which some guys do run like a mono shock leader, there's a little bit of stretch and play in that where it's going to keep the tension. But if you've got zero stretch in your line and they're shaking that jig, things like, it's just going to fall out of their mouth. That's why all the captains, you go fishing on these boats, when they tell you hook up, you've got to keep cranking and almost yank on it another 2, 3, 4 times just to really set that J hook in their mouth, because sometimes it hits them just in a hard spot in their mouth. And then, or, you know, if it does hit them in that hard spot, where I'm going with that is that hook doesn't penetrate through the roof of their mouth or whatever, and you have to yank on it a couple times. Like if the tip of that hook just barely catches and doesn't go to the barb or doesn't grab a solid piece of meat, he's going to shake that jig and that J hook is just going to shake right out of his mouth. And so why I'm fishing the circle hook and a treble hook is just to increase my hook to land ratio. I know the circle hook is going to work. Treble hook, it's probably going to work too. We'll see about that. But I don't like having the dancer rigs on it either, because when you think about that jig falling, if those hooks are like up here and that bluefin comes by and swipes it, that's a lot of times why those bluefin get hooked on the side of their face. Not to go on a rant about J hooks, but I'm not a fan of fishing those dancers that go halfway down the jig, because if they are too long, they'll get tangled up. But B, you want your hook on the bait where those fish are going to be biting. All right. So these are a couple concepts that I'm going to be running this year. I did catch a couple fish on the circle hook last year for tuna fishing, but I'm going to add that treble hook on the top end. I don't like the circle hook on the top, because it's the way a circle hook works in my mind is they bite it, and as you come tight on it, it maneuvers into the corner of their mouth, and that's how they get hooked. But if they grab it from the side and there's like that jig and everything else right there, I don't think it's going to work the way it's supposed to work with the line pulling that way. So I'm going to run a circle on the bottom, treble hook on the top. I'll let you guys know how it turns out. Anyways, important piece right here is we're not going to have our finesse rig with like 6 foot of leader. You don't want your leaders equal length. Okay, you can still run a super heavy jig and heavy fluoro, and then you can run your light stuff. And if you don't like it, you can always cut it off. It's no big deal. But I think you're kind of killing 2 birds with 1 stone here, you know, offering 2 different presentations. And if you do hook 2 fish, 80-pound fluoro, you think about the drag. Like a lot of my Shimanos are 44 pounds of max drag pressure. So it's like I've got 80-pound leader. I'm not going to break that fish off. I've never had any issues breaking a fish off, no matter how big it is, with 80-pound fluoro. It just doesn't happen. And you've got that circle hook, so you don't really have to worry about it chafing. And like the J hooks, if you're running a light fluorocarbon, it could hit, you know, a certain spot on their mouth and it chafes up, because they do, those bigger bluefin do have like some teeth on them, and it's kind of like a serrated edge. If you're, you know, fighting and you hook them way back in their mouth, you could break off. That's why the guys are running, you know, 150, 180-pound fluorocarbon. But with a circle hook, most likely going to hook them right in the corner of their mouth, and you're not going to have any issues landing a fish with that 80-pound fluoro. I'm super excited to try this rig. I think it's going to work. Hopefully we'll have a 2-fish problem on our hands. I'm headed out May 24th on the Producer. It's a 1.5 day. They've been crushing the bluefin tunas lately at Shogun, New Luan, a couple other boats. Those are just ones off the top of my head that have absolutely been killing it. I'm super excited for this bluefin tuna bite. Excited to try some new rigs. Hopefully this kind of opens your eyes to a concept, or maybe you just want to add that little finesse presentation along with your jig. And then during the daytime, man, maybe swap it up, leave that thing on there, throw a live sardine, and then put like a little flat fall on it. Those little flat falls still work. They're just not in style anymore. Just my opinion, guys. Hopefully you kind of agree. Maybe think you give it a try. Let me know how you do. If you do run this rig, I do think there are some obvious issues with the EBING rig. I think we can do better. This is my version of doing better. I hope you guys catch some bluefin tuna this year. If you want to go with me, let me know. Let's make a little group trip out of it, boys. I'm super excited. And if you guys want to go along, I think it'd be a great time. All right, until next time. Later.